In 21 days, I was in Kailash. I could barely speak. I took one strand of what is there on that mountain. You won't believe. I was almost 10 to 15 years younger.
A 94-year-old monk finally revealed what his monastery had hidden for generations. Ancient Tibetan texts described Mount Kailash in ways that sounded less like religion and more like engineering. Then AI analyzed the writings and found patterns nobody expected. The mountain may not be what it appears to be, and whatever lies beneath it may explain why it was never meant to be opened. The monk who spoke. His name was Chen Huim Min. He was 94 years old, and for nearly 6 decades, he had kept what he knew hidden. He had studied the texts, listened to the stories passed down through his community, and followed the warnings of older monks. They had told him that the information was not meant to be shared yet. Chen believed them, until he decided the waiting was over. The texts had been protected by his community for generations. They were not simple prayers or poems. They contained descriptions of places, shapes, distances, and spaces beneath the surface. Again and again, one strange term appeared, an anchor point. According to the texts, this anchor point was connected to Mount Kailash in western Tibet, and its purpose was not worship, it was protection. That was where the story became unusual. Modern AI tools were used to compare the old descriptions with geological information, satellite images, expedition records, and accounts from 4 different religious traditions. The goal was not to prove the texts were true. It was to see whether details from the writings matched anything outside the texts themselves. Some patterns appeared to line up with unusual geographical features around Mount Kailash. Other descriptions seemed to point toward formations beneath or around the mountain. None of this proves that the texts describe a machine or a hidden structure. It could still be coincidence, interpretation, or later additions to the writings. But another detail made the comparison harder to ignore. Similar stories appeared in traditions that developed far from Tibet. The names were different, the religions were different, and the stories had changed over time. Yet several described a sacred mountain, something hidden beneath it, and a purpose connected to protection. That does not prove there is anything mysterious beneath Mount Kailash, but it leaves a disturbing possibility. If these descriptions were written long before modern mapping and satellite technology, how did their authors describe the mountain with such unusual detail? And if the old monks were not describing a myth, then what exactly were they trying to protect? A mountain unlike any other. Mount Kailash sits in the Ngari region of western Tibet. It is remote. Getting there requires days of difficult travel across high-altitude terrain. It stands at 6,638 meters. That is tall. But it is not close to the tallest peaks in the region. Everest is taller. K2 is taller. Dozens of other Himalayan peaks are taller. Here is what makes Kailash different from all of them. Every peak taller than Kailash has been climbed. Many have been climbed hundreds of times. Some have been climbed by amateur adventurers with modest preparation. The technical challenge of climbing a mountain depends on its specific geology, its weather patterns, and the skill level required to navigate its particular features. Kailash has never been climbed, not once. Not by anyone. There is no recorded successful ascent in human history. This is the first fact that the AI analysis flagged as significant. A mountain of moderate height, in a region full of serious climbers and mountaineering ambition, with 0 successful ascents across all of recorded history. The shape is the second fact. When you look at Kailash from any direction, the symmetry is obvious. It has 4 distinct faces. Each face is aligned with a cardinal direction: north, south, east, west. The alignment is nearly perfect. The shape from above is close to a pyramid. Random geological processes do not produce this. Mountain ranges form through tectonic collision, glacial erosion, and weathering. These processes are powerful but not precise. They produce irregular shapes. The specific combination of 4 aligned faces and near-pyramidal geometry at Kailash does not match the surrounding terrain. It does not match the shapes produced by the same geological forces elsewhere in the range. The third fact is about water. 4 of Asia's largest rivers have their headwaters within a small area around Kailash: the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Sutlej, the Karnali. Between them, these rivers sustain approximately 2 billion people. The mountain sits at the hydrological center of a system that feeds a quarter of the human population on Earth. 3 unusual facts converging on one location. The AI analysis had not yet reached the religious records or the expedition accounts. 4 religions, 1 peak. The AI cross-referenced religious texts and traditions from 4 separate faiths. Each one had developed its understanding of Kailash independently. Different centuries, different languages, different cultures, different theological frameworks. Every one of them pointed at the same mountain and said the same essential thing: this place is the center of everything. In Hinduism, Kailash is the eternal home of Lord Shiva. He sits at the peak in permanent meditation. The mountain is not a place to visit, it is a place to orbit in reverence. Pilgrims walk the outer circuit, called the Kora. They circle the mountain, they do not ascend it. In Tibetan Buddhism, Kailash is identified as Mount Meru. Mount Meru is the cosmic axis of the universe in Buddhist cosmology. Everything revolves around it. The physical mountain in Tibet is understood as the earthly expression of that cosmic center. Monks have taught this for over 1,000 years. In Jainism, Kailash is the site where Rishabhanatha, the first of the Jain spiritual masters, attained liberation from the cycle of rebirth. The mountain marks the place where a human being completed the highest possible spiritual journey. In Bon, the indigenous Tibetan spiritual tradition that predates Buddhism in the region, Kailash is the axis where heaven and earth meet. It is the point through which the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension connect. Every ritual in the Bon tradition that involves the highest level of cosmic address points toward this mountain. 4 independent traditions, 1 mountain, 1 consistent identification as the center, the axis, the source. The AI analysis noted the statistical improbability of this convergence. When traditions develop independently, they produce different sacred geography. Different mountains become significant to different groups, based on local history and cultural development. The convergence of 4 separate traditions on a single peak, using different language but describing the same role, is not a normal pattern. Something about the mountain itself produced the same response in every culture that encountered it. The story of Milarepa. The most famous account of what happens when a human being tries to reach the summit of Mount Kailash comes from the story of Milarepa, a Buddhist yogi who lived around 900 years ago. His encounter with the mountain has been preserved in Tibetan tradition for centuries, and versions of the story continue to appear in Buddhist and Bon accounts. According to the story, there was a contest between Milarepa and Naro Bonchung, a powerful figure from the Bon tradition. The question was simple: which spiritual tradition held authority over Mount Kailash? Instead of settling the dispute through debate, the two agreed to race to the summit. Whoever reached the top first would prove his spiritual power. Naro Bonchung began the journey using his magical drum. He rose into the air and moved toward the peak, appearing to have a clear advantage. Milarepa did not follow him in the same way. He remained behind and watched as Naro Bonchung climbed higher and higher. Then, near the end of the race, Milarepa suddenly moved toward the summit and reached it first. Different versions describe exactly how this happened in slightly different ways. Some say he used the rays of the rising sun. Others describe him moving through spiritual power rather than ordinary physical movement. The important part remains the same. Milarepa did not climb Mount Kailash like an ordinary person. He did not fight his way up the slopes. He did not rely on endurance, equipment, or physical strength. Instead, the story presents his arrival at the summit as something beyond normal human movement. That detail matters because the story does not simply say that Mount Kailash is difficult to climb. It gives the mountain a different kind of importance. The summit is presented as a place that cannot be reached through physical determination alone. For centuries, this remained a religious story. but modern records surrounding Mount Kailash create an interesting comparison. The mountain has never been treated like an ordinary peak by the communities around it, and climbing it remains deeply controversial. Unlike Everest and other major mountains, Kailash has not become a normal mountaineering destination. So the old story and the modern reality create an unusual parallel. 900 years ago, the lesson was that Kailash was not a mountain that could simply be conquered. Today, the mountain still stands, largely untouched. The question is whether that is only because of religion, geography, and human choice, or whether the old stories were preserving something about Kailash that modern explorers have yet to understand. Expeditions that dissolved. The 20th century produced some of the most skilled mountaineers in human history. The Himalayas were explored more carefully than ever before. Routes were mapped, weather patterns were studied, climbing equipment improved, and peaks that had seemed impossible for centuries were finally conquered. One mountain, however, remained different. Mount Kailash did not fall. In 1926, British climber Hugh Rutledge examined the mountain and considered an ascent extremely difficult, describing the north face as a steep wall of ice and rock. His assessment was based on the physical conditions he could observe. The mountain was not simply high. Its faces presented serious technical problems that made a successful climb appear unrealistic with the equipment available at the time. Then, in 1936, Austrian climber Herbert Tichy visited the region. During his travels, he spoke with a local lama about Kailash. According to later accounts, the lama told him that only a person completely free of sin could climb the mountain. Tichy did not attempt the ascent. The pattern continued. Mountaineers kept exploring the Himalayas, and climbing technology continued to improve. Everest was conquered in 1953. Other difficult Himalayan peaks followed. Climbers learned how to survive at extreme altitude, cross dangerous ice fields, and move across rock faces that earlier generations had considered impossible. Kailash remained untouched. There was also another barrier. The Chinese government, which controls Tibet, has never allowed Mount Kailash to become a normal climbing destination. No standard climbing route has been established, and permits for a summit attempt have not been issued. Unlike many Himalayan peaks, Kailash has remained outside the usual world of commercial mountaineering. Religion has played an important role in that decision. Mount Kailash is sacred in several traditions, including Tibetan Buddhism, Bon, Hinduism, and Jainism. For millions of believers, climbing to the summit is not an achievement. It would be an act of disrespect. That creates an unusual situation. Legal restrictions discourage the attempt. Religious beliefs discourage it further. And the mountain itself presents serious technical challenges. 3 different forces have produced the same result. Nobody has reached the summit through a recognized modern climbing expedition. That does not prove there is anything supernatural about Kailash. The mountain's geology, weather, altitude, and political restrictions are enough to explain much of its history. But the ancient texts introduce another layer. They claim the mountain was never supposed to be approached like an ordinary peak, and according to those texts, the reason may have less to do with reaching the summit and more to do with what the mountain is protecting. The time problem. The ancient text that Chen Huim Min revealed describes something they call a boundary zone around Mount Kailash. According to the writings, this zone is different from the area around it. Inside it, time does not behave normally. The claim is not simply that Kailash is spiritually important. The texts describe a physical effect that, in theory, could be measured. One of the strangest details concerns pilgrims who completed the Kora, the traditional route around the base of the mountain. The texts claim that some returned with unusually fast hair and nail growth. Their bodies appeared to show changes that suggested more biological time had passed than the number of days recorded on the calendar. Modern physics gives us one important piece of context. Einstein's theory of general relativity shows that gravity can affect the passage of time. Clocks in stronger gravitational fields run slightly slower than clocks in weaker fields. This is not science fiction. The effect has been measured and must be considered in systems such as GPS, where even tiny timing differences can create major errors. But there is a major problem with the Kailash claim. The gravitational effect produced by an ordinary mountain is extremely small. It is nowhere near strong enough to cause visible changes in human biology over only a few days. For the ancient description to be literally accurate, something far beyond the gravitational influence of Kailash itself would have to be involved. That is where the story becomes difficult to separate from legend. AI systems can compare large collections of texts and identify repeated patterns, but they cannot turn an ancient claim into scientific evidence. Reports about accelerated aging, unusual hair growth, or altered time perception would need controlled measurements before they could support a physical explanation. The analysis, therefore, does not prove that time behaves differently around Kailash. At most, it highlights an unusual pattern in the stories surrounding the mountain. Similar descriptions have appeared in accounts connected to pilgrims and local traditions, but the available evidence is not enough to establish a measurable time distortion. There is also another possible explanation. Long journeys at high altitude, extreme cold, dehydration, stress, and changes in routine can affect how people perceive time and how their bodies appear. So the question remains open. The ancient texts describe a mountain where time becomes unstable. Modern physics confirms that gravity can affect time, but nothing currently shows that Kailash produces such an extreme effect. If future measurements ever detected anything unusual, however, it would transform one of the mountain's oldest legends into a scientific mystery. The turnback feeling. In 2001, a Spanish mountaineering expedition arrived at Kailash. The team was experienced. They had the physical preparation, the equipment, and the technical skill to attempt the ascent. They had also obtained what they believed was permission to climb. They began the approach. At a specific point on the route, all of them felt something. The accounts they gave afterward describe it consistently as an internal pressure. A sudden and complete certainty that they should not continue. Not fear in the ordinary sense. Not physical limitation. A quality of wrongness about continuing that felt absolute. They had not discussed stopping. The feeling arrived simultaneously across the group. Without conferring, they all stopped. Without discussion, they all turned back. They descended. They left. They did not attempt the summit. The AI analysis compared this account against other reports from climbers and pilgrims who had approached Kailash at different times across different decades. The same experience appeared repeatedly: a sudden internal pressure, an overwhelming sense that continuation was wrong, the sensation arriving without warning and without obvious external cause. There are conventional explanations for this. Altitude affects cognition and can produce anxiety and confusion. The psychological weight of approaching a deeply sacred site can generate internal resistance that feels external. Group dynamics can amplify shared hesitation into collective decision. These explanations are real. They account for some portion of the reports. What they do not account for is the specific consistency of the experience across people with different cultural backgrounds, different religious frameworks, and different psychological approaches to altitude and fear. The feeling is described in two similar terms across too many independent accounts for coincidence to be the full explanation. The monks' texts call it the return field, a protective mechanism, something built into the anchor point specifically to prevent unauthorized approach. The equipment failures. The instrument anomalies at Kailash have been documented across enough independent accounts that they form a consistent pattern. Compasses malfunction near the mountain, needles spin, they point in wrong directions. They stop responding. The magnetic anomaly this would require is not explained by the mountain's known geological composition. Aircraft that fly near Kailash have reported instrument failures. The airspace above the mountain is restricted. The restriction is maintained by Chinese aviation authorities. This is unusual. Most high-altitude terrain in the region does not carry airspace restrictions. The restriction over Kailash specifically suggests that something about the space above the mountain is considered operationally significant. Drones sent toward the summit have experienced signal loss. Some have disappeared without returning data explaining what happened to them. The losses are not universal. Some drone flights have returned. But the rate of equipment failure and signal loss is significantly higher than in comparable terrain nearby. The AI analysis examined whether any conventional explanation could account for all three categories of equipment failure simultaneously. Magnetic anomalies can affect compasses. Electronic interference can disrupt drone signals, but a single geological feature producing compass deviation, aircraft instrument failure, and drone signal loss at the same time across a broad area would require an electromagnetic effect, not consistent with known mountain geology. The monk's texts describe the anchor point as generating a field. The field serves the protective purpose. The equipment failures are a consequence of the field operating. Whether you use the language of the texts or the language of engineering, something at or within Kailash is producing an electromagnetic effect that disrupts instruments designed to function in normal environments. What is underneath? The deepest section of the monk's texts describes what the anchor point is protecting. There is a chamber. It is deep within the mountain. The texts do not describe its exact location or its physical dimensions. They describe its contents in general terms and its purpose precisely. The contents include encoded knowledge, knowledge about humanity's origins that predates the oldest civilizations in the mainstream historical record. The AI analysis cross-referenced this claim against the accounts of similar hidden libraries and records in other traditions. The concept of a preserved archive of pre-civilizational knowledge appears across multiple independent traditions. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth in the Egyptian tradition, the Akashic Records in Hindu cosmology, the hidden chambers described in the Book of Enoch. Each tradition uses different language. Each points toward a preserved record of what humanity was before the current era. The second element the texts describe is more unusual. They call it the seed of the next world, not knowledge about the current world or the past world, something held in reserve for what comes after. The texts are explicit that this element is not intended for current humanity. It is not something we are meant to access now. The mountain's protective function is maintaining the containment until the conditions under which access is appropriate have arrived. The monk's specific claim, the one that broke his 60 years of silence, was about timing. He believed the conditions were approaching, not that they had arrived, that they were approaching. The text he revealed was not a guide to entering the chamber. It was a description of why the chamber exists and what it contains. The AI analysis could not confirm or deny the existence of the chamber. No technology currently deployed in the region has produced imaging data sufficient to map the interior of the mountain at depth. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic analysis have been applied in the region for geological purposes. The results of any surveys specifically targeting Kailash's interior have not been publicly released. The absence of interior imaging data is itself a data point. For a mountain of Kailash's modest height and significant cultural importance, the lack of published interior surveys is notable. The full picture. The AI analysis brought together every available source: geological data, satellite imagery, expedition records, religious texts, from 4 traditions, Chen Huim Min's revealed texts, equipment failure reports, time distortion accounts, and stories from people who turned back from Mount Kailash. Instead of producing one final answer, the analysis found a pattern. Again and again, different sources pointed toward the same mountain. Any single anomaly can have an ordinary explanation. Mount Kailash has an unusual shape, but unusual geological formations exist elsewhere. Its religious importance could be explained through cultural history. The lack of successful climbs can be connected to difficult terrain, government restrictions, and the powerful religious taboo surrounding the mountain. The equipment failures could also have natural causes: extreme cold, high altitude, moisture, damaged batteries, and other environmental conditions can interfere with electronic devices. Reports of strange time effects could be connected to exhaustion, altitude sickness, stress, or changes in perception. None of these explanations requires anything supernatural. But the AI analysis focused on the larger picture. Across different centuries, cultures, and types of evidence, unusual claims continued to center on the same location. Ancient traditions described Kailash as a protected and important place. Modern visitors reported strange experiences. Expedition records documented serious challenges, and the newly revealed texts added another layer to the story. That does not mean all the evidence is independent or equally reliable. Stories can spread between cultures. Later writers can change older accounts. People can interpret unusual experiences according to beliefs they already have. AI can also find patterns without proving that those patterns have a physical cause. So the analysis did not prove that Mount Kailash contains a machine, hidden structure, or unknown force. What it showed was something more limited but still interesting. The mountain has collected an unusual number of mysteries around one location for centuries. The ancient texts offer one explanation. They claim Kailash is a protected site built around something hidden. Science offers another. Geology, altitude, weather, psychology, and cultural history may explain many of the reported anomalies. For now, neither explanation can completely settle the story. There is no confirmed evidence of a hidden machine or time distortion. But there is also no simple answer that explains why so many different traditions have treated this mountain as something more than an ordinary peak. And that is where the mystery remains. The mountain now. Kailash is still unclimbed. This has not changed. The Chinese government has not issued a climbing permit. The religious taboo remains in place across 4 faiths. The mountaineering community continues to avoid the attempt. In an era where satellites photograph every square meter of the Earth's surface, where drones reach altitudes previously accessible only to the most experienced climbers, and where the last genuinely unmapped territories have largely been documented, Kailash remains the one place that is walked around but never walked up. The Kora route around the mountain's base is walked by tens of thousands of pilgrims each year. They circle it in the traditional direction. They complete the circuit at an elevation that keeps them well below the boundary zone the texts describe. They come from 4 religious traditions. They speak dozens of languages. They share one behavior. They go around, not up. The monk who broke 60 years of silence is gone now. What he left behind is the description, the machine, the anchor point, the field it generates, the chamber it protects, the seed inside the chamber waiting for a world that does not exist yet. The mountain watches. That is the phrase the texts use. It watches, it waits, it holds what it holds, and every human attempt to approach it on its own terms, rather than the terms it sets, has ended the same way. The Spanish climbers turned back without talking to each other. The compasses spin. The drones disappear. The hair grows faster than the calendar accounts for. Something is there. What it is, the texts describe, and science has not yet reached. Kailash remains unclimbed, mysterious, and unexplained. Ancient texts, strange reports, and centuries of reverence point toward unanswered questions. Whatever lies beneath it, the mountain keeps its silence. Subscribe, because this is only the beginning of what the hidden record holds.